commodity, the knowledge you can get. The attitudes, behaviors, and motivations are what determine career success. They're also what determine success in graduate school. It's not the ability to solve the math problem, it's the ability to formulate it. It's the perception, the intuition, the soft skills, creativity. Okay, Olin College. This is, I think most of you here have probably heard of it by now, so I won't dwell on this. The interesting things here are the bottom things in red. Olin was handed the mission to reinvent engineering education, and don't do it like every other school. This was our friends at the Olin Foundation. To make sure we got the point, they said, "Thou shalt not have academic departments." Okay? This is usually where I get in trouble if I'm having lunch with a bunch of department heads. Olin does not offer tenure. Olin has low tuition. That used to be no tuition until the financial crisis last year. Okay? Now it's low tuition. And finally, a continuous improvement mission that is really serious at Olin. That's what the campus looks like. If you haven't been there, I welcome you to come. We think that if you'll come and visit, that's the only way that you'll really understand what's happening at the school. You have to talk to the students. They'll tell you what we really do. Don't believe anything I say, all right? Talk to the students. Where is it? It's located a little bit west of Boston. It's actually very near Wellesley College and very near Babson College, right around where Route 128 and the Massachusetts Turnpike intersect. And that little map there shows you where our students are coming from today. And the most interesting thing is the largest number of students comes from California. Back to this idea of feasibility, viability, and desirability, and cultivating the intersection, because I'm absolutely convinced that's where innovation is going to come from. And people who are comfortable in that intersection are the people who will be the innovators going forward. This is a special problem for a school like Olin, because Olin, 90% of our faculty members are STEM faculty members. Okay? So how are we going to teach these attitudes, behaviors, and motivations? Well, the way we're going to do it is by partnerships. So we have worked hard to develop partnerships with our neighboring schools at Wellesley and at Babson, for example. We also have a partnership with Brandeis, which we will try to bring into this as time goes on. We currently, the three presidents of these schools have a strong commitment as a group to try and build what we're referring to as essentially a virtual university. And the idea here is simple. These campuses are close together physically. In fact, Olin bought the land from Babson College, so we like to say that we're closer to Babson than Babson is, because our residence halls, their residence hall is closer to our dining hall than it is to their dining hall, which we notice quite frequently in the personnel that are in the room. So proximity is really in our favor. In fact, if you were to take an outline of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and overlay it on Needham and Wellesley, all three campus boundaries easily fit within the total perimeter of the University of Michigan. If you were going to Michigan, you would think you were on one campus, right? But you have to get a bus that goes from one place to another. So if we just behave that way, we could in fact be a virtual university. Turns out to be a little bit of a challenge, I'm finding. A lot of stakeholders, including trustees, it turns out, have to be comfortable with this. But we're making progress. Some of the things that we've done recently, some of you know about this Boston Grand Challenge Summit that we held, which is a joint meeting that all three campuses sponsored. Babson has created a special degree program for Olin, an MS in Technology Entrepreneurship, which students can complete within one semester of finishing their bachelor's degree at Olin, and a number of them do that every year. We've also created a certificate program in engineering studies for students who are not at Olin. So Wellesley students, for example, and Babson students can take essentially a semester's worth of coursework over 4 years and get a certificate upon graduation from Olin, helping to prepare them for graduate work in this area. And we have a new sustainability project, which involves faculty from all three campuses. It's underway, in which we're looking for all three campuses to jointly recognize the academic achievements of students from the three campuses together. And finally, something that I think has a lot of potential, and Union might be interested in this too. We did this project, which we're calling the Charter Cities Project, last interterm. That's between the fall and the winter terms. And as a result, of some conversations we had with a fellow named Paul Romer. I don't know if you've ever heard of Paul Romer. He's an economist at Stanford. He's actually quite an influential economist. Paul had this idea of charter cities, which was published recently, I think last summer. There's actually a TED conference on this, of helping to accelerate, let's say, economic development in the third world. And to do this by thinking of Hong Kong as a template for what might happen in Africa, for example. Suppose you went to an African leader and persuaded him to deed over for 100 years, so at least 10 square miles of land on a seaport that would become a city, and the city would be governed and managed by a group of Western entrepreneurial leaders who would establish essentially British common law and allow people to own their own property, and then just let their own people come in and innovate, come up with ideas and projects, and 100 years later give it back to the country. That's his idea. And he's so interested in this that he's actually resigned his tenured appointment at Stanford, and he's now going around the world talking to leaders about this. And so I was talking with him last summer. This is really cool. Have you thought about what it means to give up your tenured appointment? I have some experience in that area. It didn't happen to change his mind, which I think is good. But he said, actually, one of the things he's worried about is that somebody is going to say yes someday, and then he's going to have the problem of designing a city from a blank sheet. And he says there's a lot of engineering problems in there. Do you think there might be any people at Olin who might be interested in that? And, of course, we are up to our eyeballs. We have a day job, okay? But our students are just passionate about changing the world. And a group of about 20 or so students from all three campuses, Wellesley, Olin, Babson, got together. We provided facilities costs for them, and they spent the interterm that month learning how to talk to each other across these disciplinary boundaries about grand challenges that really matter in the world to them, and about creativity and design and innovation in a way that might change the world. And so their idea was to jointly author essentially a blueprint for what you would do to create a new city that would have long-term economic impact for a part of the developing world. They found that was actually too hard to do in a month in general, so they had to specialize to some particular area, some particular region, and guess what they chose? Haiti. This is before the earthquake. So at the end of January, this group of students now has a blueprint for starting a brand new city in Haiti that might be an economic development zone. The two students told us that this was transformative for them. They learned how to talk to people in different disciplines, even though you know that the engineering guys have 3/4 of their labels are all STEM labels. And they've been told that everything else is a soft skill and it doesn't really matter because it doesn't have calculus as a prerequisite. And they've learned that actually does matter, and the kids in those other fields have something to contribute that's really important. And I think the earlier we get students to talk to each other across these boundaries, the earlier we try to erase the unintended consequence of the balkanization that higher education creates with these labels, the better chance we have of producing entrepreneurial leaders who really can see the innovative ideas. At any rate, this is where I want to spend most of the rest of the time talking about what does our curriculum look like, because a lot of people are interested in this. But read the last line first, okay? It really doesn't matter what the curriculum looks like. That's not the point. I mean, this is how we came out on this, but it's how you come out on this that will matter here. This isn't the secret formula. I mean, MIT doesn't have the secret formula either, and they know it, and that's why they put it on the web, okay? We would put this on the web too. Having said that, we decided that maybe there's a problem with aiming at trying to produce entrepreneurial engineering innovators, people who will transform the world, and the way we admit students to engineering schools today. Most of the freshmen in engineering on engineering campuses around the country will tell you, if you ask them, why did you choose engineering? Well, I did really well in my physics course, and my physics teacher told me I ought to think about being an engineer. I don't actually know what an engineer does, but it sounds like you can get a job in this field. And I was good at physics, or I was good at math, or my dad was an engineer, that kind of thing. How many of them tell you they'd like to be an engineer because they're innovative, because they're creative, because they're passionate about changing the world? If you talk to people who go to medical school, they'll tell you, I'm here to save lives. I'm not actually here because I did well in my biochemistry course, and somebody told me that I should think about being a physician. I think we have the cart before the horse. So if you're going to change this, and if you notice that those 7 multiple intelligences are all important for being creative and innovative, not just the math and science, then maybe we ought to look for those intelligences as well as looking for math and science ability for the incoming students. Olin's response to all this is something we call Candidates Weekend. It's our admission process, which is unusual. It requires every student to go through a weekend of interviews in which nobody knows what their test scores are. It's only about the ability to communicate and work together in a team. That's how the final selection is made. Olin has also deliberately tried to put design in the core of the curriculum and put the applied sciences in the supporting role, rather than applied sciences in the core of the curriculum with design in the supporting role, which is the way I learned when I went to school. So I think this is true that every student at Olin has had at least 10 team-based design exercises before they graduate. Does that sound right, Mark? Roughly? Yeah, there may be a few exceptions, but I mean, some courses have more than one project that they have to do. That's a lot more than I had. Team-based project design when I was in school meant that the dean worked really hard to get the mechanical engineers and the electrical engineers to create a project where students from both majors could work on the same project. That was interdisciplinary team design. Okay? And I think we need to think a little beyond that. Scope. This design thing ends with a sort of large capstone that we call scope. It's actually a variant on the Harvey Mudd College Clinic program, which you may have heard about. Ours is a year-long project with a corporate sponsor, a team of 4 to 6 students. The corporate sponsor is paying $50,000 for the outcome. It's quite serious. When they first meet, on the very first weekend, there's a meeting with the liaison engineer from the company at which they hammer out a statement of work and a schedule of deliverables. They talk about non-disclosure agreements and intellectual property, all of that. A number of patents have come out of this project over time. And the student team has a designated leader, which is the direct liaison to the company. There isn't a faculty member in between. The faculty member is on the side as a coach. So the idea here is to try to give them some experience in being an engineer, not just learning about engineering. Sort of like in music school, if you have to perform a recital before you graduate. This is the same kind of thing. Expo. One of the big problems with engineering is communicating. This is not a new problem. I can remember years ago when I first started teaching, the biggest problem that ABET had was how do you get engineers to communicate? And I think we have misinterpreted that over the years. We have decided what that really means is we need to send the students to the English department and have them take a course in how to write a technical letter, something technical communication. That must be what they mean. Actually, that's not what they mean. If you talk to people in industry, it's much closer to what you would hear from a marriage counselor who says the two of you need to learn how to communicate. Okay? It's about attitudes, behaviors, and motivations. It's not about grammar. That is really important. So what did we do? Olin has a program called Expo, at which every student, at the end of every semester, is expected to stand and deliver in front of the entire community about something they pick from their project work. So freshmen who've only been there for 4 months in December have to make either a half-hour lecture or a poster presentation for evaluation. We open the entire campus. There are about 100 visitors from industry and from neighboring universities, and many of them are carrying clipboards. And the students have to explain what they're doing and learn to look people in the eye and to earn their trust and confidence in explaining why they did what they did. By the time they graduate, they've done that 8 times. I personally think if you did nothing else at Olin but Expo, you would see a measurable difference in the maturity, the poise, and the ability to be effective leaders among our graduates if you just did Expo. Olin self-study. This is a requirement that students have to define a problem that they don't know much about, for which they have not had the prerequisites. and then to launch off into an independent study, sort of a research area, to try to figure out how to learn this. Where would you go to find this out? Now, to give you an example, all of our faculty are busy, and this is like on top of everything else. They tend to wind up having to manage these. Occasionally there's one or two that the faculty just throw their arms up and say, you just can't do this. I don't, no clue, and I'm not really interested. And those things wind up on my desk, okay? So one of them a couple of years ago was from a young lady who said, the problem I want to study is speaking in tongues in the Christian faith. I want to know about this. What is going on here? And, I said, boy, you got me. I have no clue. So what will you do? I said, I'm not going to take responsibility for reading what you write because I don't know. I'm not an expert in this area. We'll only do this if you can find an expert somewhere else who knows enough about this that could verify that the answers that you generate are in fact correct. So you find them. And she did. She found a faculty member at Wellesley College in religion who agreed to read this sort of term paper at the end. And so then I worked with her to lay out a time frame for what, milestones. You should be through reading this material by that date. You should start working your first draft by now. You should send it to this faculty member 2 weeks before the end of the semester and so forth. And she got through to the end. So that's our step towards trying to teach people the process of learning how to learn, this lifelong learning thing. And of course, at Olin, all students must start and run a business as a graduation requirement. This is not unique to Olin. At Babson, they do this too, but we've learned from them something about how to make that work. And they're not starting IBM. I mean, this is not a giant corporate exercise, but they go through all of the pieces that you run into. They understand why marketing is absolutely critical. The business of desirability hits them right in the face. They also find out that viability is not an afterthought. You can't assume that everybody's going to buy this new mousetrap because it's cooler than the other one. You actually have to persuade people to part with their money or it doesn't work at all. That's a bigger challenge than they thought. And they do this really early in their program, so that it changes their thinking. Finally, continuous improvement. Olin has an expiration date on everything. And we currently have an expiration date on our curriculum. So it expires every 7 years. And formally must be reinvented or reconfirmed. It takes away, in principle at least, the political cost of having to persuade your colleagues to consider not teaching thermodynamics the way we've always taught it and think about it in a new way. We sort of automatically do that. That's automatically a politically correct question to raise. It doesn't guarantee that we'll make wild changes every time we bring this up, but at least it changes the conversation. Now, this is our definition of design, by the way. The definition of design when I was a student was this narrow band in the middle. It went from specifications to prototype. And you did that in the junior year. You built a circuit that met certain frequency band and fidelity requirements, and that was it. Olin's definition of this goes from people to market. And at the beginning, it starts with people, and it learns how to listen to them to define what their problem is. This is sort of an IDEO thing. Have you ever heard of the company IDEO in the Bay Area? That's what they do. This is a design issue. Olin has a course called User-Oriented Design, which is intended to teach them that skill. And then, of course, there's the more traditional things that go from specification to prototype. We have a couple of courses for that. And then this last step, taking an idea which has a market, and you're pretty sure you know what the prototype can do, and you have to bring this to market. That's actually converting an inventive idea to an innovation which changes people's lives. That's the fundamentals of entrepreneurship course that we were talking about. Here's an example of this user-oriented design, this course in which students have to go out, find a client group, and learn what their needs are and propose a technology that will change their lives. The students can pick the group. That turns out to be very important. They chose bicycle messengers in Boston. These are the people who ride around on bicycles with a summons to go to court or something, and they have to go and deliver it. And our kids had just finished their mechanics of materials course, and they thought they knew exactly what to design. We needed to design a really cool bicycle lock, you know, because they'll have to leave their bike at the law firm and then go up to the 12th floor. Somebody might steal it. Turns out these guys don't bother locking their bike. It's the last of their worries. What happens to them is most of them have broken bones. A lot of them, and if you watch the way they live, they, you know, just addicted to rock music. So they have these things in their ears, blaring, and darting in and out of traffic, and it's like 31 degrees in Boston with slush on the ground. And then the messenger wants to get to them and tell them, oh no, don't go to that address, go to this address instead. So that like the cell phone goes off. What do? We get gloves on. Turns out that they fool around with stuff and run into parked cars and get hit by things. So what they wound up designing was a button. That's it. That's going to change their lives. All this thing does, it's a toggle switch that fits on your chest. And you can be listening to rock music, and then you know that the dispatcher is trying to get in touch with you. You go like that, and it toggles to the other channel, and now you can hear and when you're done hearing the new directions, you do this, and it's back to your music again. They said, man, we'd buy that in a heartbeat. Okay? That's what it means to listen to the client and not just take, you know, the more CPU and heavier memory design and so forth. Okay. Reflecting now on 10 years, you know, what's worked? What are our regrets? What are the things that might not turn out the way we should? I will focus on the negatives for a minute. And a lot of this is still speculative. Both the successes and the failures are still largely speculative because we have small numbers of data. But I'm a little bit worried because I'm just too traditional that when you teach students in this way, this sort of entrepreneurial, innovative approach on steroids, they become so used to working on problems that really matter, that touch people, that they have a shorter attention span for problems that are just theoretical and just elegant mathematics, for example. I personally worry that there's a smaller fraction of our graduates who choose to go on in applied mathematics and prove theorems. This is their calling in life. It's not zero. We have a number of who are actually doing that. But I have a hard time getting them interested in that kind of life. They want to do something that has people involved, that has products involved, that will change the world. Now, maybe this is true at every other school, too. It may not just be unique to Olin. But I'm worried that Olin's curriculum emphasizes the other so much that might not be giving them a fair vision for what possibilities exist for their future. We've infected them with entrepreneurial disease at Olin. I think it was a deliberate thing. And now we're worried about unintended consequences. Give them a choice, and most of them would prefer to work in a smaller company in which they can touch the whole spectrum of problems from people to market rather than just that little slice in the middle. And yet most of large enterprise, if you're going to send somebody to the moon, for example, and you're interested in that as an aerospace scientist, it's not going to be easy to find a small startup company that does everything. Okay, you're probably going to work on the landing module or the landing gear on the shuttle. That'll be it for 10 years. Getting them okay with that is not as easy at Olin as it might be at another school. By the way, there's a growing resistance to change at Olin, I'm discovering. Surprise. I should have known this, and I'm not sure what, if anything, can be done about it. But I had an interview with a really good colleague from Harvey Mudd College. His name is Joe Platt. Joe was the founding president of Harvey Mudd. I think he's still alive. He's in his 90s now. I don't think he's going to reach the 62-year mark for President Knott. But he told me this is what you should really worry about. He says, there's no more powerful force for conservatism than having something to conserve. And right now, at the beginning of Olin College, you have nothing to lose. People will be willing to consider anything. But he says, mark my words, 10 years from now, there'll be some things you're doing that seem to be working, and your community will feel small and fragile and dependent on these successful ideas and so proud of what they invented that you'll have to work hard to pry their white knuckles off the steering wheel to get them to consider anything else. It's like, this invention was cool. No other invention could possibly have conceived of a model that's anywhere near as good as this one. And it's the same people that we have here that were at the beginning. It's inherent. And having said that, I don't mean that as a criticism of our faculty at all, or our students. I think it's a natural progression that we all have to fight every day. Anyway, let me move on. Student learning and outcomes. And does this work from a clinical point of view? And of course we don't know. We're still working on this. I personally think one of the more widely vetted methods for looking at this is something called the National Survey of Student Engagement. How many of you have heard of this? Okay, quite a few. This is a national survey out of Indiana University. It looks at really student behaviors that are correlated with learning. It doesn't look at the learning itself, but it's widely benchmarked with about 700 universities and 500,000 students each year. And there are 5 major areas in the survey. And this is what the results look like for Olin when you normalize them. This is an odd way of doing it, but if there are statisticians in the crowd, you'll know exactly what I did. I took Olin's score and I subtracted the global mean for the whole survey, NISI. So a 0 is the global mean. And I divided it by the standard deviation of the global survey. So this is a measure of deviations from the mean in standard deviations. And then I compared it, so the red little splotch at the bottom is the mean at NISI. The green bars are for a group of selective liberal arts colleges. The yellow bars are for a group of undergraduate engineering colleges. And of course the blue thing is Olin. Oh, I have to push the right button. That does help. The bar that I'm most interested in is this one about active and collaborative learning, because I think that mimics more closely than the others the learning that will need to continue throughout the entire career of an engineer in a corporation as new technologies are developed. Finally, is any of this scalable? We don't know. We're working on it. Olin was created to produce a new paradigm in engineering education and give it away and try to help other schools, particularly large schools, figure out what to do with this. Will any of it work in their environment? We happen to be really fortunate. In the audience today, we have some colleagues from Illinois whom we are really partnering with. We're in the 2nd or 3rd year of an MOU to try to partner with them to experiment with scaling this. And you should talk with Professor Dave Goldberg. Why don't you raise your hand in case people don't know about how it's going. We're really quite enthusiastic. He told me just before the meeting that obviously they're not doing exactly what Olin does, but they're taking some of the ideas and the principles and adapting them to their own environment. And in the fall, they expect to touch 300 incoming freshmen with an Illinois Foundry Experience. Is that the name of the program? IFX. Interesting. The other thing that we're doing is partnering with Duke University and USC in this Grand Challenge series to try and provoke thinking across disciplines for these grand challenges across the country.
In the What is Engineering slide, I didn't see anything about systems, larger systems.
Yeah, I have to go back and look at it. If it didn't, it was an oversight. I think, personally, I think...
But it's actually part of a larger system. So, I mean, it seemed like there was a disconnect between the first part where you're talking and then the actual what you do.
Yeah, you're right. I would be a strong advocate for adding systems architecture, actually, to the definition of engineering. One of my favorite authors is a fellow named Eberhard Rechten. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He was CEO of the Aerospace Corporation. He was the chief engineer on the Deep Space Network at JPL. He was the chief engineer at Hewlett-Packard for a while and Undersecretary of Defense during the ICBM era. He came to us when we were at USC and wanted to write a book because he said systems engineering is the most important thing and it's not being taught. And it's because it's being thought of as statistical quality control instead of architecting new systems. So he's written a whole series of books called Systems Architecting. I'd highly recommend.
When you talked about the interviews in the admission process,
yes.
You said one of the things you look for is the students have the ability to be creative or innovative. But unlike things like math and science where we have these exams like SATs or achievement tests, which is a tried and true way of assessing those. How do you do that with the creativity, let's say? Is there some measure or some way you can compare the students in a similar way?
Terrific question. How do you measure creativity in an interview, for example? I wish we knew. I don't think we have a good rubric for this at all. Mark might be able to comment on it too. What we actually do is to bring in multiple people from different backgrounds to give you their qualitative assessment of how good of a fit this candidate is for the Olin learning model, which emphasizes creativity and teamwork. We don't actually have a checklist that says give them a score of 1 to 10 in this category, or give them a test where they have to try and, put Legos together in a certain way within 30 seconds. Nothing that quantitative. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in what we're doing. Having said that, I think it works. I mean, you can talk to the students when you're there. It's like asking you when you're bringing new faculty members to your university. You receive resumes, and you will rank the resumes from top to bottom based on something. You like the paper they wrote or the school they went to. But when you actually meet them in person, it's rare that the ranking is the same. Usually some other person winds up being on the top, and asking your team who did the interviews exactly why is it that this person is better than the other one. And it's very hard to come up with a hard and fast multiple choice test that will do that ranking for you. If you could, you didn't have to do the interviews. So it's much more multiple lens, qualitative assessment, which I don't think is soft. I think it's very hard to do along the way. Having said that, there is some work going on. Tufts University's dean, Bob Sternberg, who was a psychologist at Yale University for many years, is involved in psychometrics, and his real passion is creativity. And he's developed a series of rubrics around essays in which Tufts is now experimenting with trying to systematically bring in a group of incoming students who will be more creative than their predecessors. And he has metrics for that. So if you wanted to read metrics, that's where I'd send you.
I think President Miller will be around and happy to carry on the conversation, but thank you very much, Rick, for a stimulating talk. I think you did just what I said. You got us off and running and put us on the right foot. So thanks very much.